different world. The war with Japan was not yet over when it was unexpectedly overshadowed by other events. Waves of revolution swept across Russia, each greater and more extraordinary than the last. It was at this time that Amalia Karlovna Gishar, the widow of a Belgian engineer and herself a Russianized Frenchwoman, arrived in Moscow from the Urals with her 2 children, her son Rodion and her daughter Larissa. She placed her son in the military academy and her daughter in a girls' gymnasium, where, as it happened, Nadia Kolograivova was her classmate. Madame Gishar's husband had left her his savings, stocks which had been rising and were now beginning to fall. To stop the drain on her resources and to have something to do, she bought a small business. This was Levitskaya's dressmaking establishment near the Triumphal Arch. She took it over from Levitskaya's heirs together with the firm's goodwill, its clientele, and all its seamstresses and apprentices. This she did on the advice of Komarovsky, a lawyer who had been a friend of her husband's and was now the man to whom she turned for counsel and help, a cold-blooded businessman who knew the Russian business world like the back of his hand. It was with him that she had arranged her move by correspondence. He had met her and the children at the station and had driven them to the other end of Moscow, to the Montenegro Hotel in oruzheiny Perulok, where he had booked their room. He had also persuaded her to send Rodia to the military academy and Lara to the school of his choice. He joked carelessly with the boy and stared at the girl so that he made her blush. 2. They stayed about a month at the Montenegro before moving into the small 3-room apartment adjoining the workshop. This was the most disreputable part of Moscow slums, cheap bars frequented by cabmen, whole streets devoted to vice, dens of fallen women. The children were not surprised by the dirt in the rooms, the bedbugs, and the wretchedness of the furniture. Since their father's death, their mother had lived in constant fear of destitution. Rodia and Lara were used to being told that they were on the verge of ruin. They realized that they were different from the children of the street, but, like children brought up in an orphanage, they had a deep-seated fear of the rich. Their mother was a living example of this fear. Madame Gishar was a plump blonde of about 35, subject to spells of palpitation alternating with her fits of silliness. She was a dreadful coward and was terrified of men. For this very reason, out of fear and confusion, she drifted continually from lover to lover. At the Montenegro the family lived in room 23. Room 24, ever since the Montenegro had been founded, had been occupied by the cellist Zhivago, a bald, sweaty, kindly man in a wig, who joined his hands prayerfully and pressed them to his breast when he was trying to be persuasive, and who threw back his head and rolled his eyes in ecstasy when he played at fashionable parties and concert halls. He was rarely in, spending whole days at the Bolshoi Theatre or the conservatory. As neighbors they helped each other out, and this brought them together. Since the presence of the children sometimes embarrassed Madame Gishar during Komarovsky's visits, Zhivago would leave her his key so that she could receive her friend in his room. Soon she took his altruism so much for granted that on several occasions she knocked on his door asking him in tears to protect her from her benefactor. 3. The workshop was in a 1-story house near the corner of Tverskaya Street. Nearby was the Brest Railway with its engine depots, warehouses, and lodgings for the employees. In one of them lived Olia Demna, a clever girl who worked at Madame Gishar's and whose uncle was employed at the freight yard. She was a quick apprentice. She had been singled out by the former owner of the workshop and was now beginning to be favored by the new one. Olia had a great liking for Lara Gishar. Nothing had changed since Levitskaya's day. The sewing machines whirred frantically under the tread of tired seamstresses or their flitting hands. Here and there a woman sat on a table sewing quietly with a broad sweep of the arm as she pulled the needle and long thread. The floor was littered with scraps. You had to raise your voice to make yourself heard. Above the clatter of the machines and the modulated trills of Kirill Modestovich, the canary in its cage in the window. The former owner had carried with her to the grave the secret of the bird's improbable name. In the reception room the customers clustered in a picturesque group around a table heaped with fashion magazines. Standing, sitting, or bending over the table in the poses they had seen in the pictures, they discussed models and patterns. In the manager's chair at another table sat Fana Silentyevna Fedosova, Madame Guichard's assistant and senior cutter, a bony woman with warts in the hollows of her flabby cheeks. A cigarette in a bone holder clamped between her yellowed teeth. Squinting her yellowish eyes and blowing a stream of yellow smoke from her nose and mouth, she jotted in a notebook the measurements, orders, and addresses, and requests of the thronging clients. Madame Guichard had no experience of running a workshop. She felt that she was not quite the boss, but the staff were honest and Fedosova was reliable. All the same, these were troubled times and she was afraid to think of the future. She had moments of paralyzing despair. Komarovsky often went to see them. As he walked through the workshop on his way to their apartment, startling the fashionable ladies at their fittings so that they darted behind the screens playfully parrying his ambiguous jokes, they seamstresses, disapproving, muttered sneeringly. "Here comes his lordship, Amalia's heartache, old goat, lady killer." An object of even greater hatred was his bulldog Jack. He sometimes took it with him on a lead on which it pulled with such violent jerks that Komarovsky followed stumbling and lurching with outstretched hands like a blind man after his guide. One spring day Jack sank his teeth in Lara's leg and tore her stocking. "I'll kill that demon," Olia whispered hoarsely into Lara's ear. "Yes, it really is a horrid dog. But how can you do that, silly? SSH, don't talk so loud, I'll tell you. You know those stone Easter eggs, the ones on your mama's chest of drawers? Well, yes, they're made of glass and marble. That's it. Bend down and I'll whisper. You take them and dip them in lard, the filthy beast will guzzle them and choke himself, the devil. That'll do it." Lara laughed and thought of Olia with envy. Here was a working girl who lived in poverty. Such children were precocious. Yet how unspoiled and childlike she was. Jack, the eggs, where on earth did she get all her ideas? And why is it, thought Lara, that my fate is to see everything and take it all so much to heart? 4. Mother is his, what's the word, he's mother's, they're bad words, I won't say them. Then why does he look at me like that? I'm her daughter, after all. Lara was only a little over 16, but she was well developed. People thought she was 18 or more. She had a good mind and was easy to get along with. She was very good looking. She and Rodia realized that nothing in life would come to them without a struggle. Unlike the idle and well-to-do, they did not have the leisure for premature curiosity and theorizing about things that were not yet practical concerns. Only the superfluous is sordid. Lara was the purest being in the world. Brother and sister knew the value of things and appreciated what they had achieved so far. People had to think well of you if you were to get on. Lara worked well at school, not because she had an abstract love of learning but because only the best pupils were given scholarships. She was just as good at washing dishes, helping out in the workshop, and doing her mother's errands. She moved with a silent grace, and all her features, voice, figure, gestures, her grey eyes and her fair hair formed a harmonious whole. It was a Sunday in the middle of July. On holidays you could stay in bed a little longer. Lara lay on her back, her hands clasped behind her head. The workshop was quiet. The window looking out on the street was open. Lara heard the rattle of a droshky in the distance turn into a smooth glide as the wheels left the cobbles for the groove of a trolley track. I'll sleep a bit more, she thought. The rumble of the town was like a lullaby and made her sleepy. Lara felt her size and her position in the bed with 2 points of her body, the salient of her left shoulder and the big toe of her right foot. Everything else was more or less herself, her soul or inner being, harmoniously fitted into her contours and impatiently straining toward the future. I must go to sleep, thought Lara. And conjured up in her imagination the sunny side of Coachmakers Row as it must be at this hour, the enormous carriages displayed on the cleanly swept floors of the coachmakers' sheds. The lanterns of cut glass, the stuffed bears, the rich life. And a little farther down the street, the dragoons exercising in the yard of the Znamensky barracks, the chargers mincing in a circle, the men vaulting Into the saddles and riding past, at a walk, at a trot, and at a gallop, and outside, the row of children with nannies and wet nurses gaping through the railings. And a little farther still, thought Lara, Petrovka Street. Good heavens, Lara, what an idea! I just wanted to show you my apartment. We're so near. It was the name day of Olga, the small daughter of some friends of Komarovsky's who lived in Coachmaker's Row. The grown-ups were celebrating the occasion with dancing and champagne. He had invited Mother, but Mother couldn't go, she wasn't feeling well. Mother said, "Take Lara. You're always telling me to look after Lara. Well, now you look after her." And look after her he did. What a joke. It was all this waltzing that had started it. What a crazy business it was. You spun round and round, thinking of nothing. While the music played, a whole eternity went by like life in a novel. But as soon as it stopped you had a feeling of shock, as if a bucket of cold water were splashed over you or somebody had found you undressed. Of course, one reason why you allowed anyone to be so familiar was just to show how grown up you were. She could never have imagined that he danced so well. What clever hands he had, what assurance as he gripped you by the waist. But never again would she allow anyone to kiss her like that. She could never have dreamed there could be so much effrontery in anyone's lips when they were pressed for such a long time against your own. She must stop all this nonsense. Once and for all. Stop playing at being shy, simpering and lowering her eyes, or it would end in disaster. There loomed an imperceptible, a terrifying borderline. One step and you would be hurtled into an abyss. She must stop thinking about dancing. That was the root of the evil. She must boldly refuse, pretend that she had never learned to dance or that she'd broken her leg. 5. That autumn there was unrest among the railway workers on the Moscow network. The men on the Moscow-Kazan line went on strike, and those of the Moscow-Brest line were expected to join them. The decision to strike had been taken, but the strike committee was still arguing about the date. Everyone on the railway knew that a strike was coming and only a pretext was needed for it to begin. It was a cold overcast morning at the beginning of October, and on that day the wages were due. For a long time nothing was heard from the bookkeeping department. Then a boy came into the office with a pay sheet and a pile of records that had been consulted for the deduction of fines. The cashier began handing out the pay. In an endless line. Conductors, switchmen, mechanics and their assistants, scrub women from the depot, moved across the ground between the wooden buildings of the management and the station with its workshops, warehouses, engine sheds, and tracks. The air smelled of early winter in town, of trampled maple leaves, melted snow, engine soot, and warm rye bread just out of the oven. It was baked in the basement of the station buffet. Trains came and went. They were shunted, coupled and uncoupled to the waving of furled and unfurled signal flags. Locomotives hooted, guards tooted their horns, and shunters blew their whistles. Smoke rose in endless ladders to the sky. Hissing engines scalded the cold winter clouds with clouds of boiling steam. Fuflygen, the divisional manager, and Pavel Ferapontovich Antipov, the track overseer of the station area, walked up and down along the edge of the tracks. Antipov had been pestering the repair shops about the quality of the spare parts for mending the tracks. The steel was not sufficiently tensile, the rails failed the test for